All right. Bam. There we go. Dr.
Here we are.
Ryan Summers. What's going on, man? I'm so glad we get to do this.
Well,
We haven't really
dude,
got to connect since the Grand Canyon trip.
yeah, man, it's been, what was that, April? I can't even remember. I feel like I feel like it was so long ago, yet it just happened like a few weeks ago. It's weird. It was like in this other dimension of time or in location. It just happened, and now I can't even get back to my normal life. But yeah, I think it's been a few months, man, and excited to be here and connect with you and catch up on all the things.
Yeah, I was talking with my wife, Kelsey, the other day about that. I was just looking at the calendar, kind of just, looking at business stuff, thinking about Q2, Q3, we're in Q4, just looking at how everything's been going. I was like, Christ, that was a long time ago. It's like, that feels like it
Yeah.
just happened.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think also, as we were talking about before this call, I just had Doug Larson come in and talk with my staff about all the things that Doug knows about. And so just seeing him again, obviously he was on the trip with us. Like, I feel like I still see your face pop up a lot. So that makes it feel more recent, seeing all you
Hmm.
guys doing all your things. And then you remember, oh, wow, it's actually been like 5 months since we were all together. But
Yeah.
yeah, man, that was just such a blast of a trip. And, honestly, man, still just like sitting with a lot of the things that came up on that trip, both, emotionally, socially, physically. There was just, there's a lot of value in that trip that I think it's still going to take probably another 6 to 12 months to really work through. But
Yeah.
yeah, good times.
It was a fantastic time in. But let's do this here. So anybody tuning in that doesn't know who you are, what you do, let's bring them up to speed on all of those key variables.
Yeah, man, for sure. So, as with most of your guests, I feel like there's always this identity crisis and how we describe ourselves. But I'll
Uh,
keep it as simple as possible. I guess by nature and by trade, I am a doctor of physical therapy. I'm a physical therapist, but I don't really operate the way that most physical therapists do anymore. Anytime I go out to dinner conversations, meeting new people, well, yeah, I'm a physical therapist, but I work entirely remotely, and they can't really understand how that works. So, like, well, how do you deliver anything of value if you're not touching people and scraping on people and cracking their backs and whatever other thing? I'm like, well, what I actually do as a physical therapist, I work for this company called Active Life, where I am the vice president of coaching operations. And we have figured out a way, a model to help people, primarily those who are in need, to receive services dealing with pain and injury and really anything that is holding someone back from living an active lifestyle. We've created a coaching model, a methodology that was created by physical therapists, chiropractors, but we also have plenty of personal trainers and strength coaches on our staff now as well. But that's now how I operate as a quote unquote physical therapist. So that's how I spend my day to day. I oversee our remote coaching staff, but I also do a lot of mentorship. I do a lot of education for, as I mentioned, physical therapists, chiropractors, but primarily coaches in the fitness and strength industries. So we are pretty heavily immersed in the fields of CrossFit and in functional fitness, coaches who are looking to be able to better serve clients. And again, talking about pain and injury, that's kind of our bread and butter. That's our niche. But I guess one of our mottos is to professionalize fitness. But in addition to that, it's also to humanize healthcare and empower the individual. So those are our three pillars as a company, and what I wake up every day looking at my board and saying, if I do those three things, if I humanize healthcare, allow people to see physical therapy and healthcare, the entire industry in a more humanized way, great, awesome. If I am professionalizing fitness for people to now look at personal trainers as potentially an access point into fitness and healthcare to be that primary care provider, great, I can check that box. And then finally, empowering the individual. And I feel like we're probably going to talk about that quite a bit today. But for all the clients that come to work with us, like that is the number one staple. That is, if we're going to do anything in working with clients as we're onboarding them, as we're creating these different plans of attack and plans of care for them, we need to make sure that they are an active participant in that plan. And I think if there's anything that healthcare gets wrong, and probably fitness as well, is that we make clients rely upon us. We make them more of a passive individual in that plan. And it's just like, well, do what I tell you. And if you don't do it, then you're screwed and things aren't going to work out. And, if you were to ever cancel your services and membership and work with me, good luck, because you're going to get fat and lazy and out of shape and hurt again. Like that is just the complete opposite of what we're trying to do. So by empowering the individual, having them become more of an active participant in what they're trying to do, help them better understand that the body is strong, it's resilient, we can adapt. We don't need to be feeling like we're constantly disabled and that there's all these different things that are holding us back from really living our lives to the utmost true potential. That's what we're trying to do. So that's me, Dr. Ryan Summers, and that's what I try to do on a day-by-day basis.
I love it, man. That's a hell of an intro. Well done. That's good.
There we go.
So I think there's so much good stuff there that we can start with to unpack.
Yeah.
I think this concept of empowering the individual is important because with what we do, there's this fine balance of like, yeah, I want you in my coaching program because I want to be able to help you. I want to be able to get you the support you need. But there's also the expectation that you are probably going to outgrow us at some time. You're going to reach a point where you may not need me anymore, or you need somebody else. And like, that's part of this process, right? It's training, but also educating. So we can empower these people, like you said, to go actually live these very active lifestyles. For us, we talk about living at your peak, right? We get a lot of former athletes and people who just, I wake up every day figuring out how I can try to get better in all these different aspects. And so what I would love to circle back to is this pain conversation, because I think especially people listening to this who they push the gas pedal, right? The way that I like to describe our clients that come on board, they tend to be like souped up cars on the highway going about 160, right? Like tons of effort and energy. Like there's just no direction usually. There's like not a GPS. There's not clear, take this exit, then take a right and take a left. We're going to get you where you want to be. And so a lot of them do end up in this position of, I work my ass off. I train really hard. I'm pushing the gas pedal. But eventually we get this, and now I got this nagging shoulder pain and like my back's a little this and my knee and my hip. So would love to dial back in this pain conversation. You guys work with and see so many different, both athletes and coaches. Are there some very common presentations that you tend to see again and again and again? And maybe what are some ways that people can start to work on this themselves to kind of, if we want to use that bulletproof analogy that's so what's the word I'm looking for, popular nowadays?
Yeah, man, for sure. And I think it's a really valuable question and topic overall. And I'll start a little bit more generalized and talking a little bit more about, I guess, general principles rather than deep diving into the methods. The people that come to work with us, I would say on average, we are usually like a last ditch effort. And what I mean by that is that to talk about the typical clientele, type A, go-getter mentality, pushing the gas pedal, maybe not really adhering to the model of training smarter, not harder. It's, I got to continue to train harder to get to where I want to be. They've probably already been dealing with a lot of these different aches, pains, injuries, and they've tried traditional healthcare. They've gone to maybe see their local PT, their local physio. They've maybe gone to see a local chiropractor. And typically, and obviously there's a lot of really good clinicians out there, but I would say on average, generally speaking, a lot of those solutions are going to be very passive in nature. And I know I've used that term a few times already, but when I'm talking about being passive, it's lying on a plinth and getting those hands-on manual therapy to modalities. And the issue with that is that as soon as that person, that patient, that client then pops right back up, they're now living that active lifestyle again. So there's very little carryover in transition from lying on the plinth, getting those things that may or may not make you feel better. You get a low back adjustment, you pop up, ooh, hell yeah, feeling like I'm 50 years old, but I feel like I'm 30 again. Like that's the feeling that we get. But the problem with that is that usually it's very transient in nature. Those effects, those improvements, if we don't do anything afterwards, they're going to go away within like 30 minutes. And that person, maybe they're getting that adjustment, having that session at 8 a.m. Well, later that day, maybe they're going to a group class, or maybe they have a personal training session at 5 o'clock that day. Those effects are probably going to wear off. So the problem with that is that there's, again, very little carryover to living that active lifestyle. And so for the people that come to us, they've tried the thing and they might get that improvement, but it's not something that's very long lasting, and they continue to feel those pain, those side effects of pain. And when they're living their daily lives, they might be perfectly fine, but when they're doing the things that are very important to them, whether that's being able to do a push press, or being able to do a handstand walk, or being able to do whatever thing they want to do with their upper body, to use that example, well, they still have those same symptoms of pain and discomfort, because there's very little carryover to that. So what we then do is provide the model that allows them to work in, I'm not going to use the term rehab, because that's not really what we're doing. We're providing a service that still allows them to train and operate in the gym. And so one of the things we always try to do is modify training before we completely eliminate training, and provide those modalities, provide that service, provide those exercises, whatever the medium is that allows them to do those things better, more effectively, and then therefore be able to do it without that discomfort. And so we say ADIs a lot. And that, what I mean by that, the acronym is activities of daily importance. And for those same people, to go back to that model of healthcare, maybe let's say, James, you're dealing with some knee pain, and you go to your doctor and you're talking about it. He's like, well, when do you feel that knee pain? You're like, well, usually when I put about, 365 and I'm doing 5x5 front squats, it starts to get a little bit irritated. What's the doctor going to say in that scenario? Well, I don't know if we're allowed to cuss on this. Why the F would you even be trying to do that and
just
feel
stop squatting.
Yeah, just stop squatting, bro. Like that. Why? Obviously, the easy solution is to stop squatting. Does it hurt when you're walking? No. Does it hurt when you're running? No. Does it hurt when you're coming down the stairs in the morning? No. Well, then just stop squatting. Yeah. And the reason why that's not okay is because squatting for you, not even talking about the squatting is good for long-term resiliency and to be a functioning human being. That's beside the point. Mm-hmm. But the point is, being a really heavy, strong squatter is important to you. That is an activity of daily importance. And so for someone like you who finds a lot of meaning in being able to back squat a brick shit house, being strong and being a fit guy, to then be told, well, just stop doing it because that's the only thing that's causing your knee pain, that's not a good enough solution. Right?
Yeah, that's a cheap way out.
It's a cheap way out, and it doesn't make sense. And so for the people that come to us, they've heard those things time and time again. It's not good enough for them. They want something a little bit more. But one other thing that people come to us with, and when we're talking about this idea of like empowering the individual, yeah, they might have been dealing with some pain for a while. And let's use your example again. Let's say that that's the only point in time where you have any of that anterior knee pain. You're squatting to full depth, 365. Maybe the first set of 5 feels okay. Second set getting a little bit more achy. Third set, man, you're really starting to feel it. That's week 1. It starts to continue going down this cascade. And now not only does it hurt when you're squatting, now it starts to hurt when you're walking down the steps in the morning. Maybe you do a 5K run every Saturday. I know you're not a big endurance guy, but let's say that that's the case. Now it even starts to hurt when you're doing some running. And let's say you have a 3-year-old kid, or maybe there's a master's athlete listening to this and dealing with some back pain every time they deadlift. When it goes from being predictable, only hurts when I squat, only hurts when I deadlift. Now it's gotten to the point where I bend over to tie my shoes, my back starts to lock up. I go to the local zoo walking with my grandkids. I have to sit down on a bench every 10 minutes because my back's locking up. When we start to now shift to the other end, to the spectrum of uncertainty, that's when people start reaching out to us. Pain, when it's predictable, one thing. Injuries, well, now I know I hurt my shoulder. I went for a one rep max PR after a 3, really heavy 3 days back to back to back. Obviously, my shoulder starts to hurt. But now, when I'm reaching up in the cupboard and it feels like there's a lightning bolt shooting down my arm, that doesn't feel very good. Doesn't feel very good physically. Doesn't feel very good mentally and emotionally either. That uncertainty, That's what we're now trying to solve. Yeah, you don't feel very good, but it's that uncertainty. And so now we're not only unpacking the physical limitations, the musculoskeletal problems, but now we're really starting to talk more about the biopsychosocial model of things. And what we're trying to do is, yeah, a lot of the programming we're giving people is you need to get more strong. You need to improve your strength. You need to improve your range of motion. You need to improve things like strength and balances, upward high pulling versus overhead pressing, to talk a little bit more tactically, whatever the thing may be. But again, what traditional fitness, traditional healthcare fails to appreciate, there's a lot of things going on up top, mental, emotional well-being. When people are injured, they're really screwed up, man. And so to take someone like that is that type A go-getter, let's use the idea of CrossFit. When they're a part of a community, something like CrossFit, and then a doctor says, well, just stop going to CrossFit. That's what resonates with them. Like that's a part of their profile. Like to remove them from their friends, that community, and be no longer a part of that. Good luck. One, they're not going to do it, and two, and even if they did, they wouldn't be very happy about it. So these are the things we need to better appreciate. And so when we're looking at that and we're onboarding people, it might even be like a month into our programming where we actually start having people move. We're just asking questions like, how do you feel right now? Like, how are you in your headspace? You've been dealing with this chronic pain for 6 months. Let's just talk a little bit about that. Let's journal about that. And I don't want to say we become like counselors, but our coaches are educated enough to be able to understand, like, hey, this has been a really rough patch for you. You haven't been able to do all those things that you find joy in, you find value in doing. Let's start there. We can move later. So that's a lot of what we feel like we need to focus on a lot more, because again, those clients that come to us, they've been failed. Like they haven't been asked those really deep, meaningful questions. They haven't been asked to peel back the layers of the onion and really figure out what's going on and get to the root cause of why they're not feeling the way they should.
Absolutely, man. So much good stuff there. I'm going to zip back to the very beginning because you brought something up that I really like that we've talked about before on the show, which is these more passive strategies versus these more active strategies. Passive strategies being like, I'm stretching, or somebody's scraping me, I'm getting soft tissue work, I'm foam rolling, right? It's not that none of those things can work. They can have an impact, right? But at the end of the day, what we're attempting to do is open a window of learning opportunity to get you on your feet to then actually move. Right. And this is like a really important distinction. We talk a decent amount about using external restraints and references to help people get on their feet and be successful with this. Right. For example, if I lay someone on the ground, or I put them on a bench, or if I give them something to hold on to, I'm giving them these external reference centers and restraints to actually start to work on this movement thing in an active manner so we can make positive change. Then I can take those away over time and say, okay, how are we doing now when we have none of that? You're just a human in space. Can we be in good positions? Can we appropriately stabilize, whatever word you want to use there, right? Can I get a shoulder blade moving on a rib cage? Or does everything fall apart once I remove all of these external, essentially safety wheels, if we want to call them that, right? The little training wheels. The thing is, though, I feel like a lot of people, they miss that whole middle step. They just want to say, I'm going to do these passive things, and then I'm just going to jump over all of that, and I'm going to go right back to what I was doing, right? And then they're like, man, well, it's still a problem. It still hurts. And the one that I used to see more when I spent more time training a lot of baseball players, you get a lot of guys with elbow and shoulder issues, right? And so especially in pro ball, it's gotten better. But it used to just be, hey, like, we have enough money, we just send you to the orthopedic surgeon. We're going to pop in there, do some surgery. We'll get you right back to what you were doing. But they've never addressed the underlying problem. So like 6 months down the road, the same thing they went in to have surgery for starts hurting again, right? There's this total lack of appreciation for the work to be done in the middle, right? And I'm really glad you mentioned the fact that it's not rehab. And this was a really big buzzword at one point in time, right? Like, rehab is training and training is rehab, that whole thing. And it is. Right. It is, right? Like, Great. Okay, there's a distinction, right? If you tore your ACL and we got to get you back from an ACL, there's like a very rehab-y component to that, right? But normal everyday people,
sure.
where we're just managing this movement-based problems, because that's what this all comes back to. It's like rehab and training are a very integrated, married relationship. It's not just two separate worlds entirely.
Right. Yeah. And to clarify my point with that, I guess my issue with the word rehab is that it paints this picture that only licensed medical professionals can make people feel good. And I have a huge issue with that. Anyone listening to this knows that that is simply not the case. So when people are not feeling good, then they have to go to rehab. And that is the only medium from not feeling good to feeling good. There's a lot of people out there that are very smart and that have the education and expertise to move someone from not feeling good to feeling good. And it's not through rehab. Maybe a better term would be reconditioning, perhaps, or building resiliency. You use the word bulletproof. I love that term. I really like the word resiliency because now that paints more of a model of I guess, awareness rather than being careful. I really hate saying... Hate's a strong word. I really dislike when people say, be careful, especially coming from a medical professional. Hey, you just had a shoulder injury. Be careful when you're going overhead again.
Yeah.
Well, what does that now make? How does that make you feel inside?
Bro, that's psychology.
Right? Exactly.
It's just mental terrorism.
Right. Exactly. Well, the term what I would use, it now puts a thought virus in your head. And that thought virus is, well, I'm about to do something super sketchy. And I'm not confident in doing it because I was told to be careful. So now you have this fear avoidance that when you're going into a snatch or overhead or whatever the thing is, or throwing something really fast like a baseball, well, I got to be careful because if it goes wrong, then I'm going to re-injure myself, versus being aware, understanding the risk versus the reward. Hey, right now you're doing a workout that has a lot of volume, has a lot of intensity. You're doing it for 30 minutes. The goal is to do as many rounds as possible. Also, you had a really tough week at work. I know you and your spouse aren't getting along real well right now. You're probably underhydrated. There's a lot of factors to be aware of right now. I'm now going to let you make the decision for yourself on how hard you want to go in this workout. Versus, here's the intended stimulus. Here's the intended outcome of what we're trying to do. We're looking at things more big picture, more macro. Now asking the question, is this something that's going to move the needle towards that goal? Or are you thinking more from a workout versus training perspective? And the difference between those two is training, looking at big picture. Does this move me closer in that direction or not? Workout, I'm just going to fucking do whatever I think is best and just run my body into the ground, not really understanding the implications of that. Yep, there's a lot of risk to that. So anyway, the rehab, not a fan. I don't like telling people to be careful. Going back to again, that idea of being active, empowering the person. Here's the factors we need to consider: risk versus reward. Well, how do we need to go about it? And providing guidance. And I think that's probably something else we can talk about. But just that idea of being more of a Sherpa. I really like that term Sherpa. I think that was the Body Knowledge podcast, Dr. Andy Galpin and those guys. I think it was on the Barbell Shrug. Multiple shout outs to the Barbell Shrug and Doug Larson on this call today. Yeah. But they think they had like a 10 episode series on this idea of being a Sherpa. And I really like that idea. You're guiding someone. It's not, you're not carrying them up the mountain. You're showing, here's the path. Hey, there's something over there. If you walk too close to the edge, you might fall off. Best to stay over here. I went on a whitewater rafting trip a couple weeks ago, and you have a guide. Hey, as you're approaching a class 5 rapid, he's telling you, all right, if anyone goes for a swim, meaning you get kicked off the raft and you're swimming down the rapids, don't go that way. You're going to get stuck under a rock and probably die. Swim this way instead. He's not swimming for you, but he's telling you, here's the best course of action. So anyway, I think that is what allows us all to operate together. Physical therapist, strength coach, PT chiropractor, medical provider, functional medicine provider, and it all comes back to empowering that individual. I know that's not how we started that little talk there, but that's how I'm going to end it.
Good. I like it, man. No, I think like the concept of the thought virus is really important also. And this is one that really, to reference the Family Guy, that really grinds my gears, right? Doctors are so well trained. One of the things that they are horrendously trained in is the language they use when they're speaking to the person sitting in front of them on a table. For people that are interested in this realm, a really good book called Explain Pain. Totally blanking on the author's name right now. Oh,
is that Mosley? Is that no?
I think maybe.
Is that Justin Mosley? I'm blanking on it as well.
Here we can do a quick little. This is why we love Amazon.
I know I have it somewhere here.
Explain Pain is by Butler. Yep, Butler, David Butler, and Lorimer Mosley.
Mosley, yeah. Mosley was somewhere in there.
Phenomenal book in this realm, and just like how important what's going on between the ears is for people when they're on this journey. Like I remember being in college and had a stress fracture in my back, and the guy the doctor I was seeing, he's like, well, you're never going to squat again. That's off the table. You're never going to do it. Right. I was just like, I'm just not like most people. I'm just obnoxiously stubborn. So, right. I was like, okay, I just got up and left. I was like, I don't value your opinion, so I'm going to leave. I think you're wrong. But
right. Yeah.
Most people aren't as stubborn as I am. And a lot of people get this thought virus implanted. And then they start to think of themselves as broken, or they start to think of themselves as weak or endangered or sick, or they start like walking on needles all the time. Like you mentioned, right? It's like, well, be careful when you go back to do this. It's like, you know, this as an athlete, the last thing you want to be is hesitant and cautious and having to like really overthink things all the time. That's the fastest way for you to get injured, because you're just going to be holding back, as opposed to having somebody be the Sherpa and guide you on this path so you can be confident that when it's time to go, you can kind of shut your brain off and rely on the fact that, hey, I've done the work necessary to be able to do this thing well. Yeah. And that's just, I don't know, that's a big one for me that gets mismanaged a lot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're speaking both from like the anecdotal evidence of it, how important that is, but I can't tell you how much research and literature there is looking at confidence in returning to sport. You have to have confidence. So I have these, I guess it's a checklist of what I call the 5 C's of returning from injury. And that last C is confidence. So, I mean, you're preaching to the choir here, man. And so like, let's just talk about ACL reconstructions, but if you're working with a soccer athlete, a soccer player, and they're maybe month 8, typically, for those that don't know, ACL is anywhere from, I would say, 6 to 12 months of a recovery. If you're really itching to go back, and the high level athletes, like everyone talks about Wes Welker, he got back in like 5 to 6 months. He's an outlier. If you can take 12 months, take 12 months. The reason being, yes, now you're gonna get your full range of motion. You're gonna get your strength balance back. You're gonna get your quad firing the right way. You're gonna get allow that tissue to actually heal. But the other issue with, or I guess not the main issue with that, is that whenever we're working with that kind of athlete, and you're talking about maybe dealing with a medical doctor or a surgeon, they focus a lot on those timeline progressions. And so people that come to us and they're like, well, I saw my doc and I had this, labral tear and I got surgery for it. And it's been 6 months. So he said I was good to go. And he said just to take it easy. Or that soccer player, well, it's been 12 months and he said I was good to go and I have full range of motion. So I'm good to go back and doing non-contact drills. Well, that's a timeline. Doesn't really give us objective benchmarks to say you're ready to go. But more importantly, they don't take the time to ask the questions on, how do you feel about your leg right now? They've probably been, if they've been doing anything, if they've been running or jumping or doing anything overhead, they've probably had a brace on there, or they've had a sling, or a protective mechanism like you're describing, something that provides them of a little bit more support. Well, now they take that off and they're running around. If they don't have that level of confidence, so much research showing us that the risk of re-injuring that tissue, of having a setback, drastically increases. So confidence, giving people that blanket of confidence. And what I mean by blanket is that, you can have all the range of motion strength as you want, but if people are empowered and they have that confidence, they've been doing all the things they need to be doing, and they actually go from that plinth where, they're doing quad knee extensions or whatever, straight leg raises. Well, now are they actually on a field with a physical therapist looking at how they're cutting and doing dynamic stuff? You do that, for 3 months, of course that's going to build confidence because you're not giving them that fear avoidance that as we're describing. And one other thing I want to touch on when you're talking about bedside manner or potentially lack of communication from medical doctors, I always want to make sure it's very clear. There's good and bad doctors out there. There's good and bad with anything.
Yep.
But what we see a lot is that there's a lot of great clinicians, a lot of great physicians that can't operate the way that they should because the healthcare model just simply doesn't work. And so what I mean by that, or to give an example, is if you go to your primary care physician, they might be seeing 30, 40 patients that day. And as a result, you're going to go in there, they're going to spend 10 minutes with you, ask you a couple questions, and then give you, either they're going to say, stop doing the thing, as we've discussed. They're going to give you some pharmaceuticals. They're going to maybe recommend an injection or maybe get some imaging and then potentially surgery. There's not a lot of a holistic model to it, or maybe they'll refer you out to a local physio, whatever the case may be. That 10-minute session, of course, it's going to feel rushed. Of course, they're not going to be able to really unpack this to the degree that it's warranted because they don't have the time. They don't have the bandwidth. And that's not their fault at times. That's just because the healthcare model that we have is completely broken. It's a trash can fire. And, we have to fix it. We all understand that. But I just want to make sure it's clear, like, oh, don't go see your physician because they're not going to listen to you. There is value in doing that, especially if you're presenting with a lot of these red flag symptoms of like, I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm curled over with stomach pain. You got to go see someone, obviously.
Yeah.
But just to talk more about the model itself and not, just say that, physicians don't listen to you. It's a systemic effect, I guess.
Yeah, it's a complex problem. There's a lot of issues going on there that people are actively trying to improve, which is a good thing because it does need improving, right?
Yeah.
But one thing I would like to circle back on here, let's see, we're at a little over 30 minutes here. Come back to one concept here to try to leave people with some really maybe more actionable advice that they can go and work on their own. And so when people start asking me questions around this realm of pain, discomfort, injury, and training, I think like when I try to whittle it down as simple as possible, it's okay. The first question is this. Do you have the requisite range of motion available passively in a very safe environment, right? Is it there? If I lay you on a table and we're just going to have a gander at what's going on, do you actually have shoulder flexion? Do you actually have hip flexion? Do you have hip extension? Right? These just very basic range of motion parameters. Like if you don't have it passively, right? If you're just one of those really stiff individuals, and this is where the classification is going to come. If you're one of those super stiff people that on a table does not have access to it, then we got to spend time with you getting access to that, right? Because that's the limiter. But then on the other end of the spectrum, and this is where I think of it as stiffness and laxity, on the other end of the spectrum, you put the people on the table and they've got range of motion 4 days, right? Your high lax individuals that just, they have this end range feel and it just keeps going forever. You're like, oh, this is just never going to stop. And we're going, right? That population has the requisite range of motion. But that population, on average, from my experience at least, tends to have a very hard time orienting and controlling and stabilizing in space, right? They are just kind of like lost. So they need more actions and activities that are going to help them figure out where they are in space, how to appropriately stabilize, and control this preposterous amount of range of motion they've been given. As opposed to your big, stiff, jacked bros that have like this much shoulder flexion. It's those are the two camps I try to push people into to keep it as simple as possible. It's, hey, you either got to figure out how to better control and stabilize, or we need to spend some work winning back some range of motion for you. Because, right, if you don't have it passively, you're not just going to magically reclaim it when I put you under load and high stress. It just doesn't work that way. So that's, I don't know if that classification works for you in terms of how you guys start to maybe try to simply put people in one or two buckets.
Yeah, 100%. So I think one of our overlying principles or methodologies is what we call the hierarchy of needs. And it's really what you're describing. I'll try to not get too far into the weeds with it, but basically everything, the hierarchy, looking as if it's a triangle, the base of that is going to be flexibility. And as you're describing, flexibility is I would define it as passive range of motion. Can you take your finger and bend it back as far as it can go? And I use that example because if anyone's listening to this and they do that, if you're driving the car, maybe pull over, don't do it right now. But bending your finger back, what you're going to feel is that there's a little bit of a stretch on the front. If you don't feel that, that's an issue because you should feel a stretch. And when we're talking about these different terms and these different definitions, and I bring this up because you're talking about someone who's maybe lax or a little bit hyper flexible. Well, they can still present with something that feels tight.
Oh yeah.
And so, well, you know what I mean? And so when people are looking for help, like, let's say someone's doing an overhead workout and before they do it, they're in the gym and they're hanging out on a band and they're hanging out like, it feels like it's really tight right through here. It feels really tight. It feels like it's irritated maybe. Well, you lie them down and see if they have full shoulder flexion. That's not the solution. They don't need to continue to stretch. They have full range of motion. They have full flexibility. The next layer to that, what you're also alluding to, is what I would define as mobility, meaning active range of motion. Can you move through that range of motion? So if flexibility is the window, okay, mobility is how much of that window can you actually access using a little bit of strength to reinforce it more or less. And so that same example, bending your finger back, now can you get to that same range of motion without pushing it by actively bending your finger back? And so what we're looking to see, typically, you're not going to have more mobility than you do flexibility. But how close you can get to that in range of motion is really what we're looking to see. And then the next layer from that is what we would define as strength balance. So generally speaking, we need to have balance across the joints. We need to be as good pushing versus pulling. We need to be as good anterior versus posterior, or deadlifting versus squatting. There's these different ratios that we like to look at, and it's not the end all be all. If you're a little bit, and so one example might be, we would like for most of our athletes to squat about 80% of what they deadlift. Not from a 1 rep max, but looking at like a load volume, reps times weight, looking at about 80% squat to deadlift. Like that's one example of that. Now, if you're squatting 85%, that's not to say, we got to just now start deadlifting more. It's a piece of the puzzle. Strength balance, upper body, lower body. And then from there, we're looking at work to rest ratios. So if you're doing a lot of shit, not recovering from it, stress plus recovery equals adaptation. You're putting a lot of load on your body, not allowing it the necessary time to recover and adapt from that. Well, that might be the low-hanging fruit. We're not going to work on flexibility. We're not going to work on mobility. You just maybe need to take a week of deloading because you've built up this big cycle. October, a lot of people going through Squattober, starting to feel a little bit beat up. That's a perfect example right there. Acute to chronic workload
acute
ratio
load
right
spike
there.
Through the roof.
Load spike. Yeah, I'm starting to feel a little bit achy. Well, one of the first questions is, just tell us about what the last months look like for you. Well, I took all summer off from squatting, and then I decided to do Squattober, and I'm feeling like I got a little bit of a pinch in the front of my hip. Guess what we're not going to do? We're not going to be doing hip flexor stretches. We're not going to be doing couch stretches. You probably just need to cut back on the squatting a little bit. So it really keeps things simple. And then finally, at the top of that hierarchy, we're looking at what you're maybe talking about, a little bit of mobility, but skill and motor control. And so it's just a really simplified way to better understand when someone who has all the range of motion in the world, full shoulder flexion, full hip flexion, full ankle dorsiflexion, they have all those, they meet all those requirements, all those prerequisites, but they still can't do an overhead squat. Why is that? They can't piece those things together. They can't combine this to this to this. They can't brace effectively. Maybe they don't have the technique, the coordination, the motor control. Maybe they've only been doing it for a month. Well, you just need to practice a little bit more. That's what we fail to appreciate. So that's one of our guidelines. That's one of our onboarding methodologies to say, hey, here's where we're going to start. Yes, there's a lot of other things we're going to consider, but for coaches that are coming to work with us and go through our education, is this a really good way to keep things simple? It's I'm a big believer in Occam's razor that usually the most simple solution is the best solution. If we can keep things simple, then start there. It allows us to really start delivering immediate value and just at least start moving things in the right direction versus just kind of looking at things. You started the call by saying pain is very complex. 100%. But if we allow it to be complex and try to deal with it with very complex solutions, well, it may or may not work. But the issue with that is if it does work, we don't know why it worked. It's not standardized. It's not repeatable. Or if it doesn't work, then we're just like, oh, well, we tried this, and this. I don't know what the next step needs to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think simple always wins, right? Try the simple solution. Always go simple first. If simple doesn't work for you, then we'll try more complex things. But simple tends to work the vast majority of the time. And that's one of the things that we see a lot. And it was funny, I was talking to Mike Dola earlier today from Stronger You Nutrition, and we were talking about the simple versus complexity. And humans just have a way of always wanting to try the most complex. Like, it's like we have two options. Like, this option is really simple and boring, but it's a high likelihood of working. Then there's this other option that's super complex and fancy and sexy, but the likelihood of it working is low. But I'm going to go with the super fancy complex thing over here.
Give me that.
Right?
Especially if I saw an influencer talk about it. I definitely want to. If someone has 150,000 followers and they talk about it, give me that all day.
Yeah, dude, because they obviously know what they're talking about.
Exactly.
Obviously. It's not genetics. It's definitely not genetics. Whatever it is, it's not genetics. Dude, this is one that drives me insane because I've been seeing more and more of this on Instagram where there are these people selling these stretching range of motion programs, and you just watch these people move, and I'm like, bro, you literally tick every box for the high laxity individual. Like, your range of motion is genetic. Like, you hyperextend every joint in your body.
Yeah.
I'm like, people, like, your stretching program is not going to be the solution. We're probably going to cause more harm than good. That's one that's been driving me nuts recently. I see it more and more where these people, I'm like, Jesus, I'm like, you're going to wreck these people. You're going to get them stretching all day long. They're probably not going to get any better. And then they're going to wonder, why am I not getting better?
Right. Well, let me ask you this. How often do you have your clients that are reaching out to you or other coaches saying, hey, I saw this post from this guy and I want to see if that's something that would work for me. Should we include that in my programming? Does that happen to you frequently?
We actually don't get that often. And I wonder why. Like, very rarely we will. Like, I had somebody post one in our forum the other day because we do an Ask Me Anything every Wednesday with all of our clients. And one of the posts was, hey, I saw an article that Chris Hemsworth did this training for one of the Thor movies. And it was just blood flow restriction training. Right. And I was like, yeah, so there actually is a decent amount of literature that's going to support BFR training. If we think about hypertrophy, we're just getting a more metabolically stressed, right? You have metabolic stress on one side, have mechanical tension on the other. You're taking a more metabolic stress emphasis to drive hypertrophy. It can work for sure, but it's not like the only solution. And it also tends more, the literature is in that rehab return to play realm where like load can't be high. So I need to somehow put more stress on the system. We don't need to go into my answer to the BFR, but that's the most recent one I can remember seeing.
BFR is sick, dude.
Yeah.
I can talk about BFR all day. That stuff is sick. Like, you want to get you can get jacked and improve tendon capacity by being passive, by literally doing nothing, by just applying BFR. It's crazy how cool BFR is. But
it's a very powerful,
different topic another time.
It's a very powerful tool. Very powerful tool. The signaling mechanisms that you get.
Right.
Yeah. We can do a whole other podcast on blood flow restriction training.
Yeah, dude, I can talk about it all day. Yeah. But I was only asking just from the standpoint, we actually get it pretty frequently. And I don't know if the topics of pain and injury are more sexy in the Instagram worlds or whatever, but we get it all the time. And I think the most common answer to it is just we talk a lot about principles over methods. And I'm not obviously going to name any names with these different influencers, but there's a lot of people that say this exercise is going to solve all your problems. This exercise is good for knee pain. If you drive your knees over your toes more frequently, it'll build resiliency in your patellar tendon. And the way that we always combat that is like, that's a 100%. That's a great exercise. But based on our assessment data, based on what we've figured out at this point, we actually need to be doing these things instead based on these overlying principles. That's one method that currently doesn't fall within this overlying principle. And I just think there's so many fancy golden things out there where people are trying to grab onto them. That's going to make me stronger. That's going to make me look better. That's going to give me the six pack. But for what we're talking about, I mean, I guess, self-proclaimed experts in these things, it's simple. If you want to lose weight, guess what you got to do? You got to eat a little bit less and you got to move a little bit more. It's not that
Yep.
hard. But there's a lot of methods out there that say, here's the foolproof plan to it. And I was just curious if, how you I guess address those questions, or like, hey, well, what about this thing?
Yeah.
I saw it floating around. Is it something we're going to incorporate? I want to look like Thor. Well, yeah, that exercise is what it made him look like Thor. But guess what else? What he did? He trained like 5 hours a day and bulked up on like 50,000 calories, and that's how he built mass. It's really not that hard to do. But anyway, I digress.
Response. I was just going to say, I think our response to that usually is like, a lot of things work, right? There are a lot of tools in the toolbox. Our job is to determine what tool is the best tool for you right now, based off of you, your presentation, where we're at in your program, our assessment. This is the tool that we think is going to work best for you for X, Y, and Z reasons. It's not that this tool can't work or it doesn't work. It most definitely can. It's just, in our opinion, not the best tool for you right now. It's something that we can use later on, right? Like once we get these other core principles in place that we're working on, right? That's usually how we try to approach it, because we're very much a similar thing where we want to think principles. There are things that we want to see. As you're able to demonstrate these things, that opens up the toolbox. We can try more things, but we got to get good at the basics first before we start trying all this super fancy stuff, right? Because you're just potentially not ready for that input or that stimulus yet. That's usually the way that we approach it if it comes up.
Yeah, 100%, man. I would say everything works. Nothing works all the time. And in addition to that, there's never going to be a perfect recipe. You can take the box of the thing and put all the stuff in it, but what sets apart an expert coach understands, okay, a little bit of taste testing here. We're gauging the response to that external stimulus. And really that to me is what coaching is. If you really want to break it down, I gave your body an external stimulus and load. We're gauging the internal response to that to see what changes we need to make. And you can never do that very effectively if you're just focusing on the method. So it's like you're saying, building consistency, building a foundation, keeping things simple. And then afterwards you can get as creative as you want. But yeah, that's the starting point, thinking more from a principles standpoint of the why are we doing these things versus maybe the what or how.
Beautiful, man. I love it. So let's wrap with just two quickies. So first one is, for people that have listened to this, if they're going to walk away with just one thing, just one nugget, what is one thing that you would really like for them to walk away with?
I don't know if I've ever said it this way before, but I'll put it this way. The human body is strong and adaptable until proven otherwise. And I don't know if I've ever said it that way, so I don't know if that really makes the amount of sense that I think it does. But what I mean by that, to unpack it a little bit more, and I'll use that ACL analogy like we were talking about earlier. A lot of people are like, well, I tore my ACL. What should I be doing? To keep things simple, what I usually tell people is the main thing you need to be working on post-op ACL is improving your quad strength. It's the number one thing is quad strength until it's no longer quad strength. And so when people are coming to us, when they're working with someone like you, when they're going to their medical provider, a physical therapist, it's really coming at it with that pre-framed mindset of the body is strong and adaptable. And when we're talking about the idea of injury or pain, the majority of the time, it's about sensitivity. It's about irritability. The body has, for whatever reason, started to not like a certain movement or activity. And it's telling us that. And I'm not going to get too far into pain science here, but that's really what pain is. Your brain's number one job is to protect you from doing something stupid that's going to kill you. And when it starts to sense that there's something out there it doesn't like, and that makes sense when you're getting bit by a rattlesnake or putting your hand on a hot stove, remove yourself from that situation as quickly as possible. But sometimes that alarm short fires a little bit, and then you're walking or running, and it's like, oh, my calf starts to not feel good. Well, it doesn't mean you strained your calf. It just, there's a little bit of sensitivity there to that running at that volume, at that speed, and we can make some changes to that. But as long as we have that mindset that I'm strong, I'm resilient, I didn't break something, I'm not damaged, the body is strong and adaptable until proven that it's not, then that's really the mindset we're trying to create. And then to unpack the until it's not, obviously there's a lot of red flags that are out there that tell us, hey, you really need to take a step back and maybe get some imaging. Maybe you actually do need surgery. And so red flags, number one, that's like the precursor to that. If you're listening to this and you've had some pain, and I used the example of waking up in the middle of the night. Night pain, that's one of the trademark signs of cancer. I'm not trying to like scare anyone here, but like, those are things we need to get assessed from a medical provider. If you've had pain that has been going on for 3 weeks and you haven't, maybe you're having some pain with squatting and you're like, I'm just going to chill out and rest a little bit, but that pain is still there or it's worsening, that might be a red flag. You want to get that checked out. Pain shooting down your limbs, and it's something like sciatica, and it's causing numbness, it's causing tingling. Maybe, and then there's things that are coming on and off for no reason whatsoever. As you're sitting in a computer chair and your whole arm goes numb and you can't feel the side of your face, you probably want to get that looked at. But otherwise, once we get rid of all those red flags and it becomes a little bit more about that sensitivity, the body is strong and adaptable. And again, when we're talking about what we see out there a lot, it's painting this picture that people are frail, people are very fragile. We want to make sure that people understand they're not fragile. The body the body is resilient. The body is adaptable. And when we're looking at things as, the idea of reconditioning and looking at training is the pathway. Being strong and resilient is the pathway to get back to being asymptomatic. It's not something where we feel bad and we just remove ourselves from that equation. We want to keep people moving and active as much as we can. And through the variable manipulation, by making some small alterations to their programming and their daily lives, the more we can keep people moving, the better off.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. You're not fragile, right? If you're a human being, I think I posted this at one point. Like if you're alive today, you had an ancestor at some point in time that was a savage. The only way that you are alive today is you had an ancestor at one point in time that was an absolute savage. Yeah. We are not fragile. If human beings were fragile, we would not have made it through evolution in the last however many thousands and thousands and thousands of years.
Seriously, man.
Not fragile.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, that might be different here in 50 years as we continue to devolve as a species, but we're not there yet.
Yeah.
As we continue to stop lifting, moving, carrying heavy
doing
things,
everything.
We might get to the point where, it might get to the point where we're looking like all the people in Wall-E where they're just on hovercrafts. That might be a different scenario at this point, but today, as you're describing, yes. I guess another way of putting it, when you're saying like squatting, one of the ways I describe it is that you don't have a knee problem. You have a squatting problem. Just we can make alterations to that squatting. We can change tempo, volume, depth, intensity. We can change implement, front squat to back squat. We can use a box. There's a million ways to still allow you to still keep squatting. It's not because you have a knee problem. And the more we can take that idea, that model, and apply it to whatever other thing it is, like that's what we're trying to create.
Awesome, man. So last one here, easiest one.
Yeah.
Where can people go to find more about you and the awesome work that you guys have going over there at Active Life?
I appreciate it. And yeah, so you can follow me on Instagram. That's my primary hub, at dr.ryan.summers. I have a website, drryansummers.com. For Active Life, and you can go to my Instagram and my bio, all these different things are there. Activelifeprofessional.com. We also have a relatively big influence on Instagram, Active Life RX, at Active Life RX, and at Active Life Professional. Everything we have going on, we put it on there. But perhaps more importantly, I think we do a really good job of just educating people. Dr. Mesa Henawai, I think I said that right. Sorry, Mesa, if that's not the case. She runs all of our social media and does a fabulous job of taking a lot of these different ideas and principles and talking about it in a way that's really easy to understand. So, following us at Active Life RX, that's probably the best way to learn more about what we do, our mission, our values. I think that's probably the number one resource right there.
Excellent, dude. Thank you again so much for coming on. Really glad we got to do this.
It was a blast. Yeah.
Everybody listening, go give Ryan a follow. Check out all the cool stuff they have going on. Have a fantastic rest of your week. And yeah, that's all we got for you. We'll be back next Monday.
All right. See you guys. Thanks, man.